Frank Hughes had cleaned their offices for 5 years, invisible to everyone except the mop bucket and the midnight shadows of Reynolds Auto Tech. But when a $1 million engine prototype stumped every engineer in the building, when Chase Reynolds offered $10,000 to anyone who could fix it, when the whole garage laughed at the old black janitor who dared to speak up, that's when Frank finally decided to stop hiding. He didn't want the money. He wanted one day in their R&D lab. One day to prove what they'd stolen from him 15 years ago. Chase Reynolds thought he was calling a bluff when he accepted the bet. He had no idea he'd just handed the keys to his father's empire to the same man they'd destroyed, framed, and forgotten. What happened next would expose the deadliest corporate conspiracy in automotive history and prove that sometimes the best person to take out the trash is the one who's been watching where all the bodies are buried. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The rhythmic swish of Frank's mop against the polished concrete floor created a steady beat that nobody else in Reynolds Auto Tech seemed to notice. Years of practice had taught him how to move through the garage like a ghost, cleaning without interrupting, observing, without being seen. Today, though, the usual hum of power tools and casual mechanic banter was replaced by something else entirely. Frustration, thick and heavy as motor oil. A crowd of mechanics huddled around Bay 3, where a sleek black luxury sedan sat with its hood propped open like a patient awaiting surgery. The car gleamed under the fluorescent lights, its curves and angles speaking of money and precision engineering. But something was wrong. Very wrong. I'm telling you, I've never seen anything like this, muttered Steve Mitchell, the shop's senior mechanic, wiping grease from his forehead with the back of his hand. The diagnostics show nothing. Everything checks out fine, but the damn thing won't run properly. Maybe it's the fuel injection system, suggested Tommy Parker, a younger mechanic who'd only been with the shop for 6 months. Could be clogged. Injectors. Steve shook his head. Already checked. Pristine. Like everything else in this engine. Frank continued mopping, drawing closer to the group. His trained ear caught every word, every frustrated sigh. The engine in question was unlike anything he'd seen roll into the shop before. A custom V12 prototype, the kind of engineering marvel that cost more than most people's houses. The automatic doors at the front of the garage suddenly burst open with a pneumatic hiss. Chase Reynolds stormed in, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the floor with military precision. At 35, Chase had inherited his father's square jaw and cold blue eyes, along with the family business. What he hadn't inherited was patience. What the hell is going on here? Chase's voice cut through the garage like a whip crack. I've got Jameson Automotive breathing down my neck about this prototype, and you're all standing around like it's show and tell? The mechanic straightened instantly, like soldiers coming to attention. Steve stepped forward, trying to maintain his composure. Mr. Reynolds, we've been working on it all morning. The engine's complex, and— Complex? Chase interrupted, his face reddening. That's what I pay you for, to handle complex. This isn't some kid's Honda Civic with a bad spark plug. This is a $1 million prototype that needs to be running perfectly by Friday. Carmen Diaz, the shop's only female engineer, cleared her throat. She was brilliant, with 2 degrees from MIT and a reputation for solving problems others couldn't. Actually, Mr. Reynolds, I have a theory. The microvalve system might be misaligned. If we look at the— Chase turned to her, a condescending smile spreading across his face. A theory? That's cute, Carmen. Maybe stick to what you know best, paperwork and coffee runs. Let the real mechanics handle this. The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen's face flushed, but she held her ground, her dark eyes flashing, with controlled anger. Frank noticed her hands clench into fists at her sides. Devin Washington, eager to impress the boss, jumped in. Don't worry, Mr. Reynolds. I got this. Just give me another hour, and I'll have her purring like a kitten. Chase nodded approvingly. That's what I like to hear. Initiative. Not theories and guesswork. Devin puffed up his chest and dove under the hood with renewed vigor. The other mechanics dispersed slightly, giving him room to work while Chase paced nearby, checking his Rolex every few minutes. Frank moved his mop bucket closer, positioning himself where he could see into the engine bay. His eyes traced the complex arrangement of components, noting the unusual configuration of the cooling system, the placement of sensors, the routing of cables. Something tugged at his memory, a ghost of recognition. An hour passed. Then another. Devon's confidence gradually deflated like a slow leak in a tire. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto the pristine engine block as he tried everything he knew, and some things he didn't. "Well?" Chase demanded, his patience finally exhausted. Devon emerged from under the hood, defeated. I don't know, boss. It's like the engine's fighting itself. Everything looks perfect, but it just won't cooperate." The tension in the garage ratcheted up another notch. Chase's jaw worked silently, a vein pulsing at his temple. Frank had seen that look before. Someone was about to get fired. "Check the auxiliary rotation coil," Frank said quietly, almost to himself. The words dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Every head turned toward him. Frank stood there with his mop, a 62-year-old black man in faded coveralls, speaking about advanced automotive engineering. The laughter started with Devon, a nervous chuckle that spread through the group like a virus. Soon most of the mechanics were laughing, the tension breaking in waves of mirth. "Did the janitor just try to tell us how to fix an engine?" Devon wheezed between laughs. Chase's laugh was different, cold and sharp. Well, looks like everyone's an expert today." He walked over to Frank, standing uncomfortably close. "Tell you what, Frank, since you seem to know so much about engines, why don't you take a shot at it?" Frank met his gaze steadily. "I was just making an observation, Mr. Reynolds." No, I insist." Chase's smile was predatory now. "In fact, let's make it interesting. $10,000 says you can't fix this engine. What do you say, janitor? Want to earn some real money?" The laughter died away. This wasn't funny anymore. This was cruel. Frank set his mop aside carefully, considering. "I don't need your money, Mr. Reynolds." "Oh, too rich for you?" "No, sir. But if I fix this engine, I want something else. One full day of access to your R&D lab, that's all." The request was so unexpected that Chase actually took a step back. The other mechanics exchanged confused glances. Why would a janitor want access to the R&D lab? Carmen watched Frank with new interest, noting the quiet confidence in his stance, the way his eyes had cataloged every component in that engine with a single glance. "You're serious," Chase said, more statement than question. "Yes, sir. 48 hours to fix the engine. If I succeed, 1 day in the lab. If I fail, I'll work overtime for 6 months, no extra pay." Chase's eyes narrowed, calculating. The humiliation value alone was worth it. When Frank failed, and he would fail, it would serve as a perfect example to keep the rest of the staff in line. "Deal," Chase said, extending his hand. "But let's move it to Bay 6. Don't want you disrupting the real work." Frank shook his hand, his grip firm and calloused. "Bay 6 will be fine." As the engine was wheeled to the forgotten corner of the garage, Carmen lingered behind. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. Frank picked up his mop again. "Sometimes the best way to clean up a mess is to understand what made it in the first place." She watched him walk away, pushing his bucket, seemingly unbothered by the impossible task he'd just accepted. The other mechanics were already making bets on how quickly he'd give up. Frank reached Bay 6 and circled the engine slowly, like a sculptor examining a block of marble. He ran his fingers along the metal surfaces, feeling for imperfections invisible to the eye. Finally, he closed the hood gently and pulled out a battered notebook from his coveralls. "This isn't just an engine," he whispered to himself, opening to a fresh page. His pencil moved across the paper with surprising speed, sketching diagrams and writing equations that would have looked at home in an aerospace engineering lab. The afternoon light slanted through the grimy windows of Bay 6, casting long shadows across the floor. Frank worked in silence, occasionally making notes, sometimes just sitting and staring at the closed hood, as if he could see through the metal. By closing time, most of the mechanics had forgotten about the bet, caught up in their regular work. But Carmen hadn't. She made excuses to walk past Bay 6, watching Frank from the corner of her eye. He never seemed frustrated or overwhelmed. If anything, he looked nostalgic. As the last mechanic punched out for the day, Frank finally opened the hood again. He leaned in close, inhaling the scent of oil and metal, and smiled. A private, knowing smile. "Hello, old friend," he murmured to the engine. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" The next morning arrived wrapped in fog, the kind that made the streetlights look like glowing cotton balls. Frank was already at Bay 6 when the first mechanics arrived, his notebook open beside him, pages covered in intricate diagrams and calculations that would have impressed any engineering professor. He worked with methodical precision, documenting every measurement, every connection, every anomaly. His hands moved with the unconscious grace of someone who had done this thousands of times before. The other mechanics pretended not to watch, but Carmen noticed how they kept finding reasons to walk past Bay 6. As Frank traced a particularly complex wiring pattern, the fluorescent lights above seemed to flicker and shift, dissolving into a memory. 15 years ago, the offices of Nexus Engineering gleamed with the promise of innovation. Frank Hughes, then in his late 40s, stood before a wall of blueprints, his team gathered around him like disciples around a prophet. His suit was crisp, his confidence unshakable. "This is it," he told them, pointing to the revolutionary engine design spread across the drafting table. "This will change everything. 40% more efficient, 60% cleaner emissions, and it'll outlast anything on the market by a decade." His team nodded enthusiastically. They believed in Frank, in his vision. He was the rising star of automotive engineering, the man who could see solutions where others saw only problems. The memory faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Frank staring at a similar engine, in a different time, wearing very different clothes. "Your math was close," he murmured, adjusting a tool Carmen had left on the workbench. "Just needed the right phase offset." Carmen, who had been pretending to work on inventory nearby, looked up sharply. "What did you say?" Frank glanced at her, then back at his work. "The microvalve theory. You were on the right track yesterday. The phase offset in the timing mechanism is off by about 3 degrees. Easy to miss if you don't know what to look for." She abandoned all pretense of working on inventory and walked over. "How could you possibly know that?" "Lucky guess," Frank said. But his eyes didn't meet hers. Carmen studied him more carefully now. The way he held the tools, the confidence in his movements, the technical vocabulary that slipped out when he thought no one was listening. This was not the behavior of a man who had spent his life pushing a mop. Later that afternoon, while Frank was absorbed in his work, Carmen found herself drawn to his notebook. He'd left it open on the workbench while he grabbed a different tool. The pages were filled with elegantly drawn schematics, complex equations, and notes in multiple colors of ink. Her engineering background allowed her to recognize the sophistication of the work, but it was a small note in the margin that caught her eye. Original concept, 2006. Patent pending. Her heart began to race. She flipped back through the pages, finding more dates, more references to patents and prototypes. Then she saw it, a diagram that looked remarkably similar to the V12 prototype Frank was currently working on, but dated 16 years ago, long before Reynolds Autotech had filed their revolutionary design patents. "Find something interesting?" Carmen jumped. Frank stood behind her, holding a torque wrench, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Frank said quietly, taking the notebook and closing it gently. "Curiosity is a good trait in an engineer. You're not just a janitor, are you?" Frank's smile was sad. "I am now." Before Carmen could press further, Devin sauntered over, a smirk playing on his lips. "How's the voodoo engineering going, Frank? You commune with the spirit of Henry Ford yet?" "Something like that," Frank replied evenly, turning back to his work. Devin laughed and walked away, but Carmen lingered. That evening, after everyone else had left, she stayed behind, diving into the company's digital archives. She searched through patent histories, design documents, and corporate records, looking for any connection between Frank and the mysterious engine designs. What she found made her blood run cold. Nexus Engineering, acquired by Reynolds Corporation in 2008. Lead engineer, Franklin Hughes. A series of revolutionary patents filed, then mysteriously withdrawn. A scandal involving alleged corporate espionage. Frank's name dragged through the mud, his reputation destroyed. And overseeing the acquisition committee, Charles Reynolds, Chase's father. "You're working late." Carmen spun around in her chair. Frank stood in the doorway of the office, his coveralls replaced with street clothes. "I could say the same about you," she replied, quickly minimizing the windows on her computer. Frank walked in, his eyes taking in the screens before she could hide everything. "Ah, you found it." "Found what?" "The truth, or at least part of it." He sat down heavily in a nearby chair. Charles Reynolds was a brilliant businessman. He knew how to spot talent, how to acquire it, and how to eliminate threats. "You designed that engine, didn't you? The original prototype?" Frank nodded slowly. "Not just that one, a whole series. We were going to revolutionize the industry. Clean, efficient, affordable." But Charles had other ideas. He wanted the designs, not the designer. Especially not a black designer who might get too much credit, too much power. "So they framed you?" "Sabotage," they called it. Said I was selling secrets to competitors. My own team testified against me, threatened, bribed. Who knows? By the time the dust settled, I was unemployable, my wife was sick, and we were losing. Our house, Carmen felt sick, and now you're working for them, cleaning their floors. "Life has a sense of irony," Frank said with a bitter smile. "But sometimes, patience pays off. Sometimes, the very thing they stole comes back to haunt them." Meanwhile, across town in his penthouse office, Chase Reynolds was on the phone, pacing, like a caged animal. "I don't care what it costs," he hissed into the receiver. "I want everything on Frank Hughes. Employment history, criminal record, parking tickets, everything. There's something off about him, and I want to know what it is." He hung up and stared out at the city lights, unease crawling up his spine. The way Frank had looked at that engine, the confidence in his voice when he'd asked for lab access, it reminded him of something, a memory from childhood. His father, agitated, talking about an engineer who wouldn't stay buried. Back at the shop, Carmen made a decision. She pulled out a flash drive from her desk drawer and began copying files, patent documents, design specifications, corporate communications from the Nexus acquisition. Her hands shook slightly as she worked. "You don't have to do this," Frank said softly. "Yes, I do. What they did to you was wrong. What they're still doing is wrong." She handed him the flash drive. "This might help, but if I'm caught, I never knew you." Frank pocketed the drive, gratitude warming his weathered features. "Thank you, but be careful. The Reynolds family doesn't forgive easily." "Neither do I," Carmen replied. The next morning, Frank arrived to find his workbench disturbed. Tools moved slightly, notebook pages out of order. Someone had been snooping. He smiled grimly and continued his work, making sure to keep his most important notes in his head where no one could steal them. By midday, he had made significant progress. The engine was beginning to reveal its secrets, and what he found confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't just a copy of his original design. It was a corrupted version, modified to fail in specific ways, to create dependence on Reynolds Auto Tech for repairs and replacements. "Figured it out yet, Janitor?" Chase's voice cut through the garage. Frank didn't look up from his work. "Getting there, Mr. Reynolds. These things take time." "Time is money, Frank, my money. Don't waste it." After Chase left, Carmen approached. "He's nervous. I've never seen him check on a project this much." "He should be nervous," Frank murmured. Then louder, "Could you hand me that phase meter?" As she passed him the tool, their eyes met. In that moment, Carmen saw not a janitor, but an engineer, a teacher, a man who had lost everything and was finally getting a chance to reclaim a piece of it. "You're not really after the lab access, are you?" she asked quietly. Frank's smile was enigmatic. "The lab is just a door, Carmen. It's what's behind it that matters." The afternoon wore on. Devin made a few more jokes, but they fell flat. The other mechanics had begun to notice the change in Frank's work area, the professional-grade diagnostic equipment he'd somehow acquired, the advanced calculations on his whiteboard. the way he spoke to the engine like a doctor consulting with a patient. As the sun began to set, painting the garage in shades of orange and gold, Frank made a notation in his book and sat back with a satisfied sigh. "One more day," he said to himself. "One more day, and then we'll show them what truth looks like." Carmen watched from across the garage as Frank carefully packed up his tools, treating each one with respect. She thought about the flash drive, about the documents she'd found, about the magnitude of the injustice that had been done, and she made a decision that would change everything. "Frank," she called out as he was leaving, "whatever you're planning, whatever this is really about, count me in." He paused at the door, silhouetted against the fading light. "Are you sure? This road doesn't lead to comfortable places." "Neither does silence," she replied. Frank nodded once, a gesture of acceptance and respect. "Then I'll see you tomorrow, engineer." As he walked out into the gathering dusk, Frank felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Hope. Not just for vindication, but for justice. The engine in Bay 6 wasn't just a machine. It was evidence. A smoking gun made of steel and wire. Tomorrow he would finish what he started. Tomorrow, the truth would begin its journey into the light. But tonight, he would go home to his small apartment, heat up a simple dinner, and plan the careful demolition of an empire built on lies. The ghost of his past was finally catching up with the present, and Frank Hughes was ready to introduce them properly. The morning air hung heavy with the promise of rain as Frank arrived at Reynolds Autotech for the third day of his challenge. He'd spent most of the night studying the documents Carmen had given him, confirming his worst suspicions. But it wasn't until he removed the main control module from the V12 prototype that the full scope of the deception became clear. Hidden, beneath a layer of legitimate components, was something that made his blood run cold. A deliberately faulty part, engineered to mimic failure after exactly 60,000 miles. The precision of the sabotage was almost admirable, if it weren't so morally repugnant. "What is that?" Carmen's voice startled him. She'd arrived early, unable to sleep after what she'd discovered in the company archives. Frank held up the component, a small black box no bigger than a deck of cards. "This is theft, fraud, maybe even manslaughter, depending on how many of these are on the road." Carmen leaned closer, her engineering training kicking in. "It's designed to fail? Worse, it's designed to fail in a way that looks like normal wear and tear, but catastrophically. It'll void the warranty, force customers to pay for expensive repairs or replacements, and if it fails at highway speeds, people could die." Carmen finished, her face pale. "Exactly. And look at this." Frank pointed to tiny markings on the component. These serial numbers trace back to a manufacturer that doesn't officially exist. "I'd bet my life savings, what's left of them, that it's a shell company owned by Reynolds." Carmen pulled out her phone, then stopped herself. "We can't tell anyone. Not yet. If Chase finds out we know, he'll destroy the evidence and blame someone else." "You're learning," Frank said approvingly. "In my experience with the Reynolds family, the cover-up is always ready before the crime is committed." They worked in tense silence for the next hour, documenting everything with Carmen's phone camera. The illegal component wasn't just in the SAW prototype. Frank's trained eye recognized design elements that appeared in the entire luxury fleet Reynolds had been selling for the past 3 years. "There must be thousands of these on the road," Carmen whispered. "Tens of thousands," Frank corrected, "and all ticking time bombs." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of shuffling feet. Mr. Lindell, the elderly customer who spent most days in the waiting area, had wandered into the garage. His white hair was slightly disheveled, and his cardigan had seen better days, but his eyes were sharp and knowing. "That engine's more than what it seems, huh?" he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. Frank and Carmen exchanged glances. "Sir, you shouldn't be back here," Carmen said gently. "It's not safe." "Oh, I've been in more dangerous places than this garage," Mr. Lindell replied, moving closer to examine the exposed engine. "Interesting design. Reminds me of some work I saw about 15 years ago. Revolutionary stuff. Whatever happened to that young engineer? What was his name?" Hughes? Frank's hand stilled on his tools. You have a good memory, Mr. Lindell. When you've invested as much money as I have in automotive innovation, you tend to remember the ones that got away. Lindell's eyes twinkled, or rather the ones that were stolen. Before Frank could respond, Devin burst into the bay, his face flushed with anger. What the hell are you two doing? I saw you taking pictures. Are you trying to… He stopped short when he saw the component in Frank's hand. What is that? Nothing that concerns you, Carmen said quickly. Bull. I know that part. I've installed dozens of them. Devin's voice dropped. They're not supposed to be in the prototypes. They're only for the production models. Frank and Carmen stared at him. You knew? Carmen asked. I thought it was just a different supplier. Cheaper. Parts to increase profit margins, but… Devin stepped closer, examining the component. His face went ashen. Oh, God. This is what caused Jamie's accident. Jamie? Frank prompted gently. My friend. He was driving one of our cars when the engine just… died. On the freeway. He got rear-ended by a semi. Didn't make it. Devin's hands were shaking. The investigation said it was a freak malfunction. Bad luck. It wasn't bad luck, Frank said quietly. It was murder. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Devin slumped against the workbench, the reality of what he'd been part of hitting him like a physical blow. We have to stop this, he said finally. We will, Frank assured him. But we need to be smart about it. Carmen, can you access the employee record system? Why? I want to see who's been signing off on these component orders. This goes deeper than just Chase. Carmen nodded and headed for the office area. While she was gone, Frank turned to Devin. I need you to think. Have you noticed anything else unusual? Any other parts that didn't seem right? Devin thought for a moment. There's been talk. Rumors about cars coming back with problems that shouldn't exist. Stuff failing way before it should. But anyone who asks too many questions gets transferred or fired. Or framed, Frank added darkly. Carmen returned 20 minutes later, her laptop under her arm. You were right. The signatures on these orders go back years. And guess whose name appears on the first ones? Charles Reynolds, Frank said without hesitation. Got it in one. But there's more. Chase didn't just inherit the company, he inherited the scheme. His signatures started appearing about 5 years ago, right after he took over. Mr. Lindell, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, it seems. Who are you exactly? Devin asked. Just an old man with too much money and too much time, Lindell replied cryptically. But perhaps it's time I became something more. Before anyone could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching footsteps sent them all into action. Frank quickly reassembled the engine component while Carmen closed her laptop, and Devin grabbed a random tool to look busy. Chase Reynolds strode into the bay, his expensive shoes clicking against the concrete. His eyes swept over the group, suspicious and cold. Quite the gathering, he said. I wasn't aware engine repair had become a spectator sport. Just explaining some technical details to Devin, Frank said smoothly. He's got a good eye for engineering. Chase's gaze shifted to Mr. Lindell. And our customer is back here because… I got lost looking for the restroom, Lindell said with a disarming smile. These old eyes aren't what they used to be, Chase. Clearly didn't believe him but had bigger concerns. Frank, your time's almost up. Tomorrow's the deadline. The engine will be ready, Frank assured him. It better be. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about something. Chase moved closer, his cologne overwhelming the scent of motor oil. My father once told me about an engineer who thought he could outsmart us. Thought he could use his knowledge against the company that made him. You know what happened to him? No idea, Frank said evenly. He lost everything. His reputation, his career, his family. All because he couldn't accept his place in the world. Chase's smile was predatory. Just something to think about. After Chase left, the group remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Mr. Lindell spoke. That young man has no idea what's coming. Neither do we, Carmen pointed out. We have evidence, but Chase owns the judges, the police, probably half the city council. Then we don't go through official channels, Frank said. At least not at first. Devin, how many cars have this component? Every luxury model built in the last 3 years, maybe 20,000 units. And how many have reached the failure point? Hard to say, maybe a few hundred so far, but it's accelerating. Frank nodded grimly. Then we have work to do. That evening, after the shop had closed, the 4 conspirators met at Frank's apartment. The small space was neat but sparse, with engineering textbooks lining one wall and framed patents on another, reminders of a life interrupted. They spread their evidence across the kitchen table: photographs, documents, component analyses, and a growing list of accidents that might not have been accidents at all. We need more than this, Carmen said. We need to show the pattern, prove it's deliberate. Frank nodded and pulled out a worn photo album. He flipped through pages of a younger man in a suit, accepting awards, shaking hands with industry leaders. Then he stopped at a photo of himself with a beautiful woman, both smiling at the camera. Marlene, he said softly. My wife. She died 3 years after we lost everything. Couldn't afford the treatment she needed. The room fell silent. Finally, Lindell spoke. I knew Marlene. She consulted on one of my projects years ago. Brilliant woman. Frank looked up, surprised. You knew her? I know many things, Mr. Hughes, including the fact that you were onto something revolutionary before the Reynolds family destroyed you. I've been waiting 15 years for this moment. What moment? Devin asked. The moment when the truth finally has enough allies to defeat a lie. Frank closed the album and stood up. Tomorrow I'll finish repairing the engine, but tonight we plan. We need to get this information to people who can't be bought or intimidated. The internet, Carmen suggested. We could create an anonymous whistleblower account. Too easy. To discredit, Lindell said. We need something more dramatic, more undeniable. Like what? Frank smiled for the first time since they'd started this conversation. Like proving that a janitor can build a better engine than their entire engineering department combined. The next morning, Frank arrived at work to find chaos. His careful workspace in Bay 6 had been destroyed. Tools scattered, diagnostic equipment smashed, his precious notebook missing. Someone had taken a crowbar to his workbench, leaving deep gouges in the metal surface. What happened? Carmen rushed over, taking in the destruction. Someone doesn't want me to finish, Frank said grimly, kneeling to pick up a shattered multimeter. They're getting desperate. Devin appeared, his face troubled. I saw someone in here last night, around midnight. I was driving by and saw lights on. When I came to check, they were already gone. Security footage? Carmen asked. Devin shook his head. Already checked. The cameras were mysteriously offline from 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Before they could discuss it further, Chase's voice boomed across the garage. Frank Hughes, my office. Now. The walk to Chase's office felt like a march to the gallows. Frank had seen this play before. The false accusations, the manufactured evidence, the public humiliation. History was repeating itself. Chase's office was a monument to inherited success. Photos of his father with celebrities and politicians, awards the company had won before Chase was born, and a massive desk that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. Sit down, Chase ordered. Frank remained standing. What's this about? This is about you sabotaging a $1 million prototype. Chase threw a manila folder on the desk. We have reports that you've been tampering with the engine, installing unauthorized parts, potentially putting our entire project at risk. That's ridiculous. I'm fixing your engine, not sabotaging it. Really? Then explain this. Chase pulled out a photograph of a component that Frank had never seen before. This was found in your work area last night. Our engineers say it could have caused catastrophic failure if installed. That's not mine. I've never seen that part before. Of course you haven't. Chase's smile was cold. Just like you'd never seen those stolen documents 15 years ago. Just like you weren't selling trade secrets to our competitors. Frank felt his chest tighten. You know that was a lie. Your father, my father protected this company from a thief and a fraud, and now you're trying to do it again. Chase stood up. You're fired, Frank, and this time, I'm pressing charges. Theft, industrial espionage, attempted sabotage. You'll be lucky if you only spend the next decade in prison. The engine isn't finished. We'll complete it ourselves. Now get out before I have security throw you out. Frank walked out of the office with as much dignity as he could muster. The other mechanics avoided his eyes as security guards escorted him to his locker to collect his few personal belongings. Only Carmen met his gaze, her expression a mixture of anger and determination. Outside the building, Frank stood in the parking lot, feeling the weight of déjà vu. 15 years ago, he'd stood in a similar lot watching his life crumble. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't alone. His phone buzzed. A text from Carmen. Meet at the diner on 5th, 1 hour. The diner was nearly empty at 3 in the afternoon. Carmen and Devin sat in a back booth, both looking agitated. They'd barely ordered coffee when Carmen slid her tablet across the table. Look what I found in my personal email. Someone sent this anonymously an hour ago. The screen showed a scanned document. Patent application 118X, high-efficiency V12 engine design. The inventor's name was Franklin Hughes. The signature at the bottom belonged to Charles Reynolds along with a note. Application denied. Insufficient documentation. This is it, Frank said quietly. This is my original patent for the engine design they stole. But how? There's more, Carmen said, swiping to the next document. It showed the same design, filed 6 months later, with Reynolds Autotech listed as the patent holder. They didn't just steal your engine, Devin said. They stole your whole future. The question is, who sent these documents? Carmen wondered, aloud. And why now? Frank added. They spent the next hour piecing together more evidence, but the anonymous source had gone silent. As the sun began to set, they decided to regroup at Frank's apartment to plan their next move. Frank's apartment felt different with other people in it. Less like a tomb of old dreams, more like a command center for a revolution. They were deep in discussion when a knock at the door made them all freeze. Frank opened it cautiously to find Mr. Lindell standing in the hallway, holding an expensive leather briefcase. May I come in? I believe it's time we had an honest conversation. Once, inside, Lindell set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with a click. Inside were stacks of documents, photographs, and what looked like computer drives. 15 years ago, Lindell began, I was prepared to invest $50 million in a revolutionary engine design. The deal was almost done when suddenly, the engineer behind it was accused of industrial espionage. My lawyers advised me to walk away. I did. It's a decision I've regretted ever since. Frank stared at him. You were the investor? The one who pulled out after the scandal? I'm ashamed to say yes, but I never stopped watching. I knew something wasn't right about what happened to you. Lindell pulled out a photograph of a younger Frank shaking hands with another man. I've been collecting evidence ever since. Waiting. For the right moment. And now is that moment? Carmen asked. Now is that moment. Because that engine in the shop isn't just a copy of Frank's design. It's something much worse. Lindell pulled out a technical diagram. See this chip embedded in the control system? It's not just collecting failure data. It's transmitting it. To where? Devin asked. To servers owned by a shell company in the Cayman Islands, which is owned by another shell company, which is owned by Charles Reynolds' private investment fund. The implications hit them all at once. They're collecting data on their own failures, Carmen said, using their customers as unwitting test subjects. Worse than that, Frank said, studying the diagram. They're using this data to design even better ways to make cars fail. It's a perpetual money machine. Exactly, Lindell confirmed. And I have the financial records to prove it. A sharp knock interrupted their planning session. Frank opened the door to find 2 police officers. Franklin Hughes? One of them asked. Yes? You're under arrest for industrial sabotage and theft of trade secrets. You have the right to remain silent. As the officers cuffed Frank, Lindell stepped forward. Officers, I'm Walter Lindell, Mr. Hughes's attorney will meet you at the station. After Frank was taken away, the group reconvened. We need to act fast, Lindell said. Chase will try to bury this quickly. I have an idea, Carmen said, her eyes bright with determination. But we'll need to break into the company servers. That's illegal, Devon pointed out. So is what they're doing, Carmen shot back. Besides, I still have my access codes. It's not breaking in if you have a key. That night, while Frank sat in a holding cell, Carmen and Devon returned to Reynolds Auto Tech. The building was mostly empty, just a skeleton crew of security guards who knew Devon and didn't question his presence. Carmen's fingers flew over her keyboard, navigating through layers of security. Got it, she whispered. The smoking gun. She downloaded everything. Emails, financial records, design documents, test data from the illegal chips. It was all there, a comprehensive record of corporate malfeasance going back decades. As they were leaving, a security guard stopped them. Working. Late? Just forgot something in my locker, Devon said smoothly. The guard nodded and let them pass. Outside, Carmen clutched the portable drive containing their evidence. Now what? Now we go see Frank's lawyer, Devon said. And then we change the world. But when they arrived at Frank's apartment to get Lindell, they found the door ajar. Inside, the place had been ransacked. Lindell's briefcase was gone, and so was Lindell. On the kitchen table was a note. Back off, or the old man dies. Carmen sank into a chair. They knew. They knew we were onto them. Devon paced the small apartment. We can't back down now, not after everything. But they have Lindell, and we have the truth. Devon picked up Frank's notebook, the one that had gone missing from the shop. This was in my car. Frank must have put it there when he knew something was wrong. Carmen opened it to the last page. There, in Frank's neat handwriting, was a complete set of instructions for rebuilding his original engine design. At the bottom, he'd written, "The truth doesn't need a title, just time, torque, and determination." We finish what he started, Carmen said firmly. But where? We can't go back to the shop. Devon smiled slowly. I know a place. My dad works at a machine shop in the industrial district. He owes me a favor. As they drove across town, Carmen's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Lindell is safe. Focus on the engine. The truth needs to be seen to be believed. A friend. Who do you think that is? Devon asked. I don't know, but right now, we need all the friends we can get. They arrived at the machine shop to find it dark and quiet. Devon's father let them in without asking questions, just handed them the keys and said, "Whatever you're doing, make it count." Inside, surrounded by tools and machinery, Carmen and Devon opened Frank's notebook and began to work. They had less than 12 hours before Frank's arraignment, 12 hours to build an engine that would prove everything. As Carmen carefully assembled the first components, she thought about Frank sitting in his cell, about Lindell wherever he was being held, about all the people driving cars with ticking time bombs under their hoods. We're going to do this, she said aloud. Devon nodded, adjusting a precision tool. For Frank, for Jamie, for everyone they've hurt. Outside, the city slept, unaware that in a small machine shop, two young engineers were about to build the key to bringing down an empire of lies. The engine began to take shape, piece by piece, truth by carefully machined truth. In his cell, Frank stared at the ceiling, remembering Marlene's words from years ago. The truth always finds a way, Franklin. Sometimes it just needs better engineers. He smiled in the darkness. The truth had found its engineers. Now it was time to let it run. The warehouse on Pier 7 looked abandoned from the outside, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust and salt spray from the nearby ocean. Carmen and Devon exchanged uncertain glances as they approached the unmarked door, the freshly built engine secured in the back of Devon's truck under heavy tarps. You sure this is the right place? Devon asked, checking the cryptic text message again. Carmen nodded, though doubt gnawed at her stomach. The address matches, but who's our mysterious friend, and what happened to Mr. Lindell? The door opened, before they could knock. A young woman in a security uniform ushered them inside quickly. "Ms. Diaz, Mr. Washington, you're expected. Please follow me." The interior contradicted the dilapidated exterior completely. Gleaming floors reflected modern LED lighting, and the air hummed with climate control systems. They passed through a series of security checkpoints before entering a vast open space that took their breath away. State-of-the-art equipment lined the walls: 3D printers, CNC machines, advanced diagnostic computers, and testing rigs that belonged in a Formula One facility. In the center of it all stood Walter Lindell, very much alive and unharmed, wearing a pristine lab coat over his usual cardigan. "Good morning," he said cheerfully, as if they were meeting for coffee. "I trust you've been productive?" "But the note said you were kidnapped," Carmen stammered, her mind struggling to process the scene. "A necessary deception. Chase's people were watching every move. I needed them to think they had leverage while I activated this facility." Lindell gestured around the warehouse with obvious pride. "Welcome to Plan B. I've been preparing this place for 15 years, hoping I'd never need it. But here we are." Devon wheeled in their precious cargo. "You knew this would happen?" I suspected. "The Reynolds family's capacity for greed is matched only by their paranoia. When Frank showed up at their shop, I knew it was time." Lindell walked to a bank of computer monitors. "This warehouse is completely off the grid. Private satellite internet, independent power generation, and most importantly, complete privacy from Reynolds' reach." "What about Frank?" Carmen asked urgently. "He's still in jail." "Not for long. My legal team is working on bail as we speak, but we need to move fast. Chase is already spinning the media narrative. Disgruntled ex-employee attempts sabotage. The morning shows are eating it up." Carmen pulled out the hard drive containing their digital evidence. "We have everything. Financial records, internal emails, proof of the illegal components, the data collection scheme. But who's going to believe us over Reynolds Auto Tech?" "They'll believe their own eyes," Lindell said with a mysterious smile. He pressed a button, and a massive screen descended from the ceiling. "We're going to give them a show they can't ignore. The truth, presented with such clarity that even Chase's best lawyers can't twist it." Over the next several hours, they developed their strategy. Carmen worked on organizing the digital evidence while Devon began creating comparison videos between Frank's clean engine and Reynolds' corrupted version. Lindell made discreet phone calls to media contacts, engineering forums, and consumer advocacy groups. "I've created an anonymous account called Truth Torque," Carmen announced, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "The evidence is already uploading to multiple secure servers in different countries. Even if they find one, they can't stop them all." "Excellent," Lindell nodded approvingly. "Now we need to prove that Frank's design is superior, not just ethically, but technically. The engineering community needs to see the data." They spent the afternoon running comprehensive tests on Frank's engine, documenting every measurement with multiple cameras and independent monitoring equipment. The results were staggering. Frank's original design was 43% more efficient, produced 62% fewer emissions, and showed durability projections that exceeded the Reynolds version by decades. As evening approached, Carmen's phone rang with a blocked number. "Frank's out on bail," she announced after a brief conversation. "He'll be here in 20 minutes." When Frank arrived, escorted by 2 of Lindell's security team, he stopped short at the sight of his engine sitting on the advanced test bench. His weathered hands reached out, trembling slightly, to touch the smooth metal surface he'd designed so many years ago. "You built it," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We built it," Carmen corrected gently. "Your design, our hands. Every specification exactly as you wrote it." Frank circled the engine slowly, checking every connection, every bolt, every wire. His trained eye cataloged details others would miss: the precise angles of the intake manifolds, the elegant routing of the coolant system, the harmonious integration of components that spoke of thoughtful design rather than corporate cost-cutting. "It's perfect," he finally said, tears threatening to spill. "After all these years, seeing it real, breathing life." "It's more than perfect," Lindell interrupted, his voice serious now. "It's evidence. Tomorrow, the world will see what you created and what they corrupted. That night, they refined their presentation strategy. News of the anonymous Truth Torque account had already begun spreading through engineering forums and automotive social media. The leaked documents were being analyzed by armchair experts and professional engineers alike. "Look at this," Devin said, showing his phone screen. "People are already sharing stories about their Reynolds cars failing mysteriously. The hashtag, Truth and Torque, is trending in 12 countries." Carmen smiled grimly. Chase must be having a very bad night. As if summoned by his name, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from a blocked number. She answered on speaker. "Ms. Diaz." Chase's voice was cold steel wrapped in silk. "I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this." "Smart enough to see through your lies," she replied evenly. "You're destroying your career. No one in this industry will hire you after this stunt. You'll be radioactive, untouchable. There won't be much of an industry left after people see what you've done." Chase's laugh was harsh, brittle. "You think you can bring down Reynolds Auto Tech with some doctored documents and a publicity stunt? We have the best lawyers money can buy, the best PR team in the business. By tomorrow afternoon, you'll all be discredited as conspiracy theorists and disgruntled former employees." "We'll see about that," Carmen said, and ended the call. Frank had been listening quietly, his expression thoughtful. "He's scared," he observed. "Good. Fear makes people sloppy." Lindell pulled out a leather folder. "Speaking of scared, I received this an hour ago." He showed them an emergency injunction filing. "Reynolds is trying to prevent us from releasing any more information. They're claiming trade secret violations, industrial espionage, the works." "Can they do that?" Devin asked anxiously. "They can try, but my lawyers are better. And it's hard to claim trade secrets when the secrets were stolen in the first place." Lindell's smile was sharp. "I've been preparing for this day for 15 years. They'll find I'm not easily intimidated." As midnight approached, they finalized their plan. Tomorrow morning at 9 sharp, they would hold a public demonstration. Lindell had arranged for independent engineers, respected journalists, and even a few professional racing drivers to attend. They would show the world two engines side by side, Frank's original design and Reynolds's corrupted version. "Get some rest," Lindell advised. "Tomorrow changes everything." But sleep proved elusive. Carmen found herself reviewing the evidence, again creating multiple backups, cross-referencing every claim. Devin was on social media, reaching out to every mechanic he knew, spreading word about tomorrow's demonstration. And Frank sat with his engine, making microscopic adjustments, lost in the work he'd been denied for 15 years. At 3 in the morning, Carmen received another threatening text. "Last chance. Walk away now or we'll destroy all of you. Your families, your futures, everything you care about." She showed it to Frank, who smiled grimly. "They threatened me 15 years ago, destroyed my career, my reputation, took everything I'd built. They think they can do it again. Can they?" Frank looked at his engine, gleaming under the warehouse lights like a metal sculpture of truth itself. "Not this time. This time, we have proof they can't erase, witnesses they can't silence, and a story the world wants to hear." As dawn painted the sky pink and gold, cars began arriving at the warehouse. Independent engineers from prestigious universities, automotive journalists from major publications, even several Reynolds employees who'd always suspected something was wrong. They set up cameras, prepared testing equipment, calibrated measurement devices with scientific precision. At precisely 9 o'clock, Frank stepped forward to address the growing crowd. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, the dignity in his bearing that no amount of humiliation could erase. 15 years ago, I designed an engine that could have changed the automotive industry. It was clean, efficient, and built to last. That engine was stolen from me, corrupted, turned into a tool for profit over safety, greed over integrity. He gestured to the two engines on display. "Today, you'll see the truth with your own eyes." They ran the tests side by side, every measurement projected on the massive screen for all to see. Frank's engine purred like a contented cat, its emissions, readings barely registering on the sensitive equipment. The Reynolds engine, the one they'd removed from the luxury prototype, ran rough, its performance obviously hampered by the illegal components designed to fail. A murmur ran through the crowd as the comparative data appeared on the screen. The difference wasn't just clear, it was staggering. Engineers pulled out calculators, double-checking the numbers, shaking their heads in disbelief. Then Carmen stepped forward with her laptop. "But performance isn't the only issue," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the warehouse. She began showing the leaked documents, the evidence of deliberate sabotage, the data collection scheme, the web of shell companies designed to hide the truth. The crowd's murmur turned to outrage. Phones came out, cameras flashed, live streams began. Within minutes, Chakra Truth and Torque was trending worldwide. Every major automotive forum exploded with discussions of the revelations. By noon, the first news vans arrived. By 2 o'clock, Reynolds Autotech stock was in freefall. By 3, former employees were coming forward with their own stories of cover-ups, intimidation, and forced silence. And through it all, Frank stood by his engine, answering questions with the patience of a teacher, explaining his design to anyone who would listen, finally getting to tell his story to people who wanted to hear it. The next morning brought a process server to Frank's modest apartment. The thick stack of legal documents felt heavy in his hands as he read through them. Reynolds Autotech was suing him for industrial espionage, theft of trade secrets, defamation, and a dozen other charges that would be laughable if they weren't so dangerous. The irony of being accused of stealing his own designs wasn't lost on him. "They're trying to bury us in legal fees," Lindell explained when Frank called him. "It's a classic tactic. Throw everything at the wall, hope something sticks, drain our resources. But don't worry. I've already assembled a legal team that makes their lawyers look like first-year law students." But Chase wasn't content with just legal warfare. That afternoon, a coordinated media blitz began. Stories appeared simultaneously in several major newspapers. The Truth About Frank Hughes, A History of Deception. The articles painted Frank as a disgruntled former employee with a documented criminal past, including arrests for theft, fraud, and industrial espionage. These charges were fabricated 15 years ago, Frank told Carmen and Devin when they gathered at the warehouse. "Part of the original frame-up, but they stayed on my record because I couldn't afford to fight them." "We need to counter this narrative," Carmen said, pacing angrily. "The public was on our side yesterday. We can't let Chase control the story." Her phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Elizabeth Morrison, her former engineering professor from MIT. "Carmen? I just saw the news about Frank Hughes. That man is no criminal. I cited his unpublished work in my advanced propulsion class for years. His theoretical frameworks were revolutionary." "Would you be willing to go on record saying that?" Carmen asked, hope rising in her chest. "Absolutely. In fact, I still have copies of his original research papers. He shared them at an academic conference before Reynolds buried him. They're time-stamped, peer-reviewed, irrefutable proof of his innovations." Carmen felt a surge of hope. "Thank you, Professor. This means everything." Meanwhile, Devin was having a difficult conversation with his father. They sat in the older man's kitchen, the same kitchen where Devin had grown up dreaming of becoming an engineer like his dad. "I knew something was wrong at the sub-factory," his father admitted, staring into his coffee with haunted eyes. "The parts we were making, they didn't match the specifications we were given. But when I asked questions, my supervisor offered me a raise to keep quiet. We needed the money. Your mother was sick, you were starting college." "It's okay, Dad," Devin said, reaching across the table to grip his father's hand. "But now we have a chance to make it right." His father nodded slowly, years of guilt visible in the lines of his face. "What do you need from me?" "The truth. On record. Everything you know about the parts, the cover-ups, the threats." That evening, Chase made his boldest move yet. He appeared on a primetime business news show, looking polished and confident in a $2,000 suit. "This is nothing but a smear campaign," he told the anchor smoothly. "Frank Hughes is a convicted criminal who's trying to extort money from our company. These so-called documents are obvious forgeries. The engine demonstration was staged. We Have experts who will testify that the whole thing was an elaborate hoax. But even as he spoke, something extraordinary was happening online. The Truth Torque account had released a new batch of documents, including security footage from 15 years ago, showing Charles Reynolds meeting privately with the judge who had presided over Frank's original case. The timestamp showed the meeting occurred 3 days before Frank's surprise arrest. Independent auto journalists began acquiring Reynolds' cars, finding the illegal components exactly where Frank said they would be. A popular automotive YouTube channel with millions of subscribers did a live teardown of a Reynolds luxury sedan, their cameras capturing every moment as they discovered the sabotage chip embedded in the engine control unit. Lindell leveraged his connections, arranging a public demonstration at the city's premier racetrack. Frank's engine would power a modified sports car against a Reynolds-powered vehicle in a series of performance tests. "This is ridiculous," Chase told reporters at the track, his composure beginning to crack. "We're not going to dignify this circus with our participation." "Afraid of a fair competition?" one journalist called out. Chase's face reddened, but before he could respond, one of his own test drivers stepped forward, Maria Rodriguez, a veteran driver who'd been with the company for 20 years. "I'll drive," she said firmly. "Let's see what these engines can really do. The truth deserves a fair test." The race was no contest. Frank's engine-powered car completed 20 laps with consistent performance, barely sipping fuel, producing minimal emissions. The Reynolds car managed 12 laps before experiencing mysterious technical difficulties, exactly the kind of failure the illegal components were designed to cause at high stress. The crowd watched in stunned silence as smoke poured from the Reynolds car's engine bay. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Maria Rodriguez climbed out of the smoking vehicle, pulled off her helmet, and walked directly to Frank. "I'm sorry," she said loud enough for the microphones to catch. "I've been driving these cars for years, telling myself the failures were normal. I should have spoken up." That night, Chase made his fatal error. Furious and desperate, he confronted Frank in the parking lot after the race. He'd been drinking, his careful control finally shattered. Camera phones appeared instantly as Chase grabbed Frank by the collar. "You've ruined everything," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "My father was right about you. You're nothing but a—" "A what?" Frank asked calmly, his dignity intact even with Chase's hands on his shirt. "A black man who's smarter than— you. An engineer who refused to let you steal his life's work? A janitor who cleaned up your mess?" Chase's fist connected with Frank's jaw. The punch was captured from multiple angles, instantly uploaded, shared, and reshared across social media platforms. Within minutes, it had been viewed over 1 million times. Within hours, 3 members of Reynolds Autotech's board of directors resigned. By morning, major investors were demanding Chase's immediate removal as CEO. The company's stock price plummeted further, wiping out billions in market value. Carmen uploaded her final report at midnight, a 100-page document detailing every aspect of the fraud, complete with evidence, testimonials, and technical analyses. She named names, cited dates, and provided irrefutable proof of the decades-long conspiracy. The report went viral immediately. Major news outlets around the world picked up the story. Former Reynolds employees came forward with their own experiences. Class action lawsuits were filed in multiple states. Consumer protection agencies launched investigations. 2 days later, federal agents raided Reynolds Autotech headquarters. Computers were seized, documents confiscated, accounts frozen. The investigation quickly expanded to include the SEC, FBI, and Department of Transportation. Chase was arrested at a private airfield, trying to board a jet to the Cayman Islands. The footage of him being led away in handcuffs, screaming about conspiracies and betrayal, became the defining image of the scandal. During his perp walk, one reporter managed to get close enough to ask, "Do you have any comment on the allegations?" "This is all Frank Hughes' fault," Chase shouted as officers pushed him into the police car. "That janitor ruined everything." The clip went viral with the caption, "When the janitor takes out the trash." A federal investigation revealed the true scope of the fraud. Reynolds Autotech had installed illegal components in over 300,000 vehicles. The data collection scheme had harvested information from millions of customers. The company had stolen dozens of patents, destroyed multiple careers, and potentially caused hundreds of accidents. Frank's name was cleared in a series of public hearings. The old charges were expunged from his record. Engineering organizations that had shunned him for 15 years now competed to have him speak at their conferences. Carmen received job offers from every major automotive company in the world. Tesla, BMW, Toyota. They all wanted the engineer who had exposed the biggest fraud in automotive history. But when a group of ethical investors approached her about starting a new kind of automotive innovation firm, she knew what her answer would be. "I'll do it on one condition," she told them. "Frank Hughes is my chief engineer." Devon's father came forward publicly, testifying about the pressure to stay quiet about faulty parts. His emotional testimony led to investigations at dozens of Reynolds sub-factories. Father and son worked together to establish a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting whistleblowers in the automotive industry. Walter Lindell called a press conference at the warehouse that had served as their base of operations. Standing beside Frank's engine, now polished and displayed like the work of art it was, he announced the creation of the Marlene Hughes Engineering Innovation Center. This facility will provide resources, equipment, and support to engineers and inventors who might otherwise be silenced by corporate interests, he declared. It's named after Frank's late wife Marlene, who believed that genius needs nurture, not just recognition. The Reynolds Autotech headquarters stood empty now, its parking lot a concrete desert. Frank visited it one last time, not to gloat, but to remember. He walked through the garage where he'd pushed his mop for 5 years, planning, waiting, hoping for justice. In Bay 6, someone had left a handmade sign. "This is where the truth began." Frank smiled and walked away, leaving the ghosts behind. Outside, Carmen and Devon waited by the car. They had a meeting with the architects designing their new facility. "Ready?" Carmen asked. "Ready," Frank replied. "Let's go build something better." As they drove away, Frank looked back once more at the building that had been both his prison and his battlefield. In the end, he'd cleaned up the biggest mess of all, not with a mop, but with the truth. And the truth, as engineers knew better than anyone, had excellent torque. The video of Chase Reynolds punching Frank Hughes had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms. News outlets replayed it hourly, each time adding more context about the growing scandal. But the punch was just the beginning of Chase's downfall. Within 72 hours of his arrest, 3 former Reynolds Autotech executives approached federal investigators with immunity deals. They brought with them hard drives full of incriminating emails, recorded conversations, and financial documents that painted a picture of corporate corruption spanning 2 decades. "We always knew it was wrong," testified James Wheeler, former VP of Quality Control, his hands shaking as he spoke to the congressional committee. "But Charles Reynolds, and later his son Chase, made it clear that our families would be destroyed if we talked. They had private investigators following our children to school. They knew which nursing home my mother lived in. They owned judges, police chiefs, even state senators." The testimony was explosive. Wheeler revealed how the illegal components were manufactured in a secret facility in Mexico, smuggled across the border in shipments marked as agricultural equipment, and installed in vehicles during the final assembly stage. Only a handful of executives knew the full scope of the operation. As Wheeler spoke, Carmen sat in the gallery taking notes. Beside her, Devon's father, Malcolm Washington, waited for his turn to testify. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, knuckles white with tension. "You okay, Mr. Washington?" Carmen whispered. "I should have spoken up years ago," he replied, his voice heavy with regret. "All those people who died in accidents, their blood is on my hands too. You're speaking up now. That's what matters." When Malcolm took the stand, his testimony provided the human element that turned public opinion from mere outrage to genuine fury. He spoke about his friend who died when his Reynolds sedan mysteriously lost power on the highway. About the single mother down the street whose car caught fire in her driveway, nearly trapping her children inside. About the countless workers who knew something was wrong but were too afraid to speak. They didn't just steal from Frank Hughes, Malcolm said, his voice growing stronger. They stole from all of us. Our safety, our trust, our dignity. They turned us into accomplices in our own exploitation. Meanwhile, Walter Lindell had been busy with media appearances of his own. On a popular morning show, he revealed the full extent of his involvement with Frank's original designs. 15 years ago, I was prepared to invest $50 million in Frank Hughes's revolutionary engine technology, Lindell explained to the host. The initial tests were remarkable. We were looking at a transformation of the entire automotive industry, cleaner, more efficient, more reliable engines that could have saved millions of tons of carbon emissions. What happened? The host asked. Charles Reynolds happened. He couldn't stand the idea of a black engineer revolutionizing the industry. He didn't just want Frank's designs, he wanted to ensure Frank would never be a threat to Reynolds's dominance. So he orchestrated one of the most comprehensive character assassinations I've ever seen. Lindell pulled out a folder of documents. I have here the original investment contracts, test results, everything. I kept it all, waiting for the day when the truth could finally come out. Back at the Marlene Hughes Engineering Innovation Center, still under construction but already operational, Frank was dealing with his own media storm. Reporters from around the world wanted interviews, photographs, his life story. He'd gone from invisible janitor to international symbol of justice in a matter of days. Mr. Hughes, how does it feel to finally be vindicated? Asked a reporter from the BBC. Frank paused, choosing his words carefully. It feels necessary. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been silenced by power. The custodians, the maintenance workers, the secretaries, all the people these corporations think are invisible. We see everything. We know where the bodies are buried. Will you be pursuing additional legal action against Chase Reynolds? I'm more interested in building than destroying. We have work to do. That work was already beginning. Carmen had assembled a team of engineers who'd been fired or blacklisted by major automotive companies for asking too many questions. They gathered in the Innovation Center, sharing stories and ideas, finally free to pursue ethical innovation. As Carmen was explaining their first project, a modular engine design that could be easily repaired instead of replaced, her phone buzzed with an alert. The Truth in Torque social media account had received a massive data dump from an anonymous source. Guys, you need to see this, she called out. The team gathered around her laptop as she opened file after file. Internal Reynolds communications going back 25 years. Detailed plans for the systematic destruction of competing technologies. Lists of politicians and regulators on the company payroll. Evidence of similar schemes in other industries. This is bigger than just automotive, Devon said, scrolling through the documents. They were planning to expand into aerospace, medical, devices, even military contracts, all using the same model, Carmen added. Steal innovation, destroy the innovator, build in planned obsolescence, control the regulators. Frank studied one particular document, a memo from Charles Reynolds to his son, dated 10 years ago. Remember, Chase, we don't sell cars. We sell controlled failure. The more they break, the more they need us. Never let them build anything. That lasts. We need to get this to the feds, Devon said. Already on it, Carmen replied, uploading the files to a secure server the FBI had provided. The next morning brought even more explosive news. Chase Reynolds from his jail cell had attempted to orchestrate the intimidation of witnesses. Prison phone recordings captured him directing his remaining loyal employees to visit the families of those testifying against him. The recordings were leaked within hours. Public outrage reached new heights when people heard Chase coldly discussing whether threatening someone's children or elderly parents would be more effective. By noon, Chase's lawyer had quit. By evening, 3 more Reynolds executives had been arrested. The company's stock was delisted from the exchange, its value essentially zero. At a press conference, the Attorney General announced the expansion of the investigation. This is not just about Reynolds Autotech anymore. We're looking at a pattern of corporate criminality that touches multiple industries. The theft of intellectual property, the deliberate endangerment of consumers, the corruption of public officials, it all points to a system that rewards sociopathy over innovation. That evening, Frank received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was elderly, distinguished, and familiar. "Mr. Hughes, this is retired Judge Harold Patterson. I was the judge in your case 15 years ago." Frank's grip tightened on the phone. "I remember. I need to tell you something. Charles Reynolds had evidence of my son's drug problems. He threatened to destroy my family if I didn't railroad you. I've lived with that guilt every day since. I want to make this right. I want to testify." After the call, Frank sat alone in his office, processing this final piece of the puzzle. Carmen found him there an hour later, staring out the window at the city lights. "You okay?" she asked. "For 15 years I wondered if I was crazy, if maybe I had done something wrong and just didn't remember it. To hear him admit it validates everything you knew was true." Frank nodded. "We need to make sure this never happens again. Not just in automotive, but everywhere. The Innovation Center isn't enough." "What are you thinking?" "A network. Innovation centers in every major city. Safe havens for inventors and engineers. Places where ideas are protected, not stolen. Where ethics matter more than profits." Carmen smiled. "That's going to take a lot of money. I know someone who might help with that." The next day, Walter Lindell announced the creation of the Hughes Innovation Network with an initial endowment of $500 million. "This is just the beginning," he told the press. "We're going to create an alternative to the corporate theft machine, a place where genius is nurtured, not exploited." As the weeks passed, the investigation continued to expand. Reynolds Autotech's crimes had touched thousands of lives, and now those victims were speaking up. Class action lawsuits were filed in every state. Insurance companies demanded accountability. Foreign governments launched their own investigations. Chase Reynolds, denied bail as a flight risk, gave a jailhouse interview that only made things worse. "This is all a conspiracy," he ranted. "Frank Hughes is part of a radical movement to destroy American business. My father was right. We should have finished him when we had the chance." The interview went viral, but not for the reasons Chase hoped. Memes appeared overnight. "When the villain admits he's the villain." His words, "should have finished him," became a rallying cry for corporate reform activists. Meanwhile, Devon's anti-retaliation nonprofit had received thousands of applications for help from whistleblowers in various industries. "It's like we opened a floodgate," Devon told his father as they reviewed cases. "People have been waiting for someone to stand up to these corporate bullies." One particularly meaningful moment came when Maria Rodriguez, the test driver who had switched sides during the public demonstration, approached Frank at the Innovation Center. "Mr. Hughes, I wanted to apologize again," she said. "I drove those cars for 20 years. I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid." "You stood up when it mattered," Frank replied. "That takes courage. I want to help. I know every test driver, every mechanic who had doubts. They'll talk to me." Frank smiled. "Welcome to the team." As the criminal trials began, the prosecution's case was overwhelming. The evidence was ironclad, the witnesses credible and numerous. Chase's defense team tried to argue that he was just following his father's established practices, but the jury wasn't buying it. During Frank's testimony, the prosecutor asked him about the years he spent as a janitor in the very company that had destroyed his career. "Every day I cleaned their offices, maintained their building, and watched them profit from my stolen work," Frank said. "But I also learned. I watched. I waited. Because I knew that eventually the truth would have its day, and now it has. Now it's just beginning." The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. Chase Reynolds was found guilty on all counts: fraud, racketeering, conspiracy, theft of intellectual property, and dozens of related charges. As the verdict was read, Chase slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his money and connections couldn't save him, but the real victory came in the aftermath. Inspired by Frank's story, engineers and inventors around the world began sharing their own experiences of corporate theft and intimidation. Universities started teaching ethics courses using the Reynolds case as a cautionary tale. New laws were proposed to protect innovators from predatory corporations. At the official opening of the Marlene Hughes Engineering Innovation Center, Frank stood before a crowd of young engineers, students, and fellow innovators. Carmen and Devin flanked him on the stage while Walter Lindell sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Innovation isn't just about creating new things, Frank told the audience. It's about creating a new way of doing things, a way that values people over profits, truth over power, integrity over expediency. He paused, looking out at the eager faces before him. For 15 years, I pushed a mop in the very building where my dreams were stolen. Some might see that as defeat. I saw it as preparation. Every floor I cleaned, every trash can I emptied. I was learning patience, learning to see what others overlooked, learning that dignity isn't in your title but in your character. The applause was thunderous, but Frank raised his hand for quiet. This center isn't named after me. It's named after my wife, Marlene, who never lost faith even when I did. She used to say, "Frank, genius doesn't need a title, just time, truth, and torque." She was right. And now it's our turn to make sure the next generation of innovators has all three. As the ceremony concluded, a young black girl, no more than 12, approached Frank. She held a notebook clutched to her chest, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mr. Hughes, I'm Jasmine. I want to be an engineer like you." Frank knelt down to her level. "You already are an engineer, Jasmine. You just need to keep asking questions, keep exploring, keep building." "But what if someone tries to steal my ideas?" Frank smiled. "That's why we built this place, so you'll never have to hide your light, so you can shine as bright as you want." As Jasmine walked away, Carmen touched Frank's shoulder. "Ready for the next chapter?" Frank stood, his eyes scanning the room full of possibility. "I've been ready for 15 years. The sun was setting over the city as they walked out of the Innovation Center. In the distance, the abandoned Reynolds Autotech building stood dark and empty, a monument to greed's inevitable failure. But here, in this new space, lights were coming on, machines were humming, and dreams were taking shape. Frank Hughes had spent years cleaning up other people's messes. Now finally he was free to make something new, something better, something that would last. The janitor had taken out the trash. Now it was time for the engineer to build the future. 1 year after Chase Reynolds was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison, the automotive industry had transformed beyond recognition. The Reynolds Reckoning, as historians would later call it, had triggered the most comprehensive corporate reform movement in American history. On a crisp spring morning, Carmen Diaz stood at the podium of the National Engineering Ethics Conference, addressing an audience of over 3,000 professionals from around the world. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the logo of the Hughes Innovation Network, now operating in 23 cities across 6 continents. "Everything I know about ethical engineering began with a janitor who refused to let thieves win," Carmen opened her keynote address. Her voice carried clearly through the convention center, commanding attention. "Frank Hughes taught me that innovation without integrity is just clever theft. That genius without ethics is merely sophisticated predation." In the front row, Frank sat quietly, uncomfortable with the attention, but proud of what Carmen had become. Beside him, Walter Lindell scribbled notes for his upcoming book about the Reynolds scandal and its aftermath. Carmen continued her speech, outlining the network's achievements. "In just 12 months, we've provided safe haven to over 200 inventors whose ideas were at risk of corporate theft. We've helped launch 47 ethical startups. We've educated more than 10,000 engineers on intellectual property protection and corporate accountability." She clicked to the next slide, showing a graph of patent filings. "Most importantly, we've seen a 40% decrease in predatory patent practices industry-wide. Companies are learning that stealing ideas is no longer a viable business model." As Carmen spoke, screens around the conference displayed a live feed from the Hughes Innovation Center in Detroit, where a new class of engineering students was beginning their orientation. Among them were several older professionals, former corporate engineers who'd left comfortable jobs to pursue ethical innovation. After the keynote, Frank was surrounded by admirers wanting photos and autographs. He handled the attention with quiet grace, always redirecting praise to the team effort that had brought down Reynolds. "Mr. Hughes," a familiar voice called out. Frank turned to see Malcolm Washington approaching, now serving as Director of Workplace Ethics for the newly formed National Whistleblower Protection Agency. Beside him walked Devon, sporting a badge identifying him as Senior Investigator for the same agency. "Malcolm, Devon," Frank greeted them warmly. "How's the new job treating you?" "Busy," Devon replied with a grin. "Turns out there were a lot of companies following the Reynolds playbook. We've opened investigations into 3 Fortune 500 companies just this month." "The auto industry was just the beginning," Malcolm added. "We're finding similar patterns in pharmaceuticals, tech, even food production. Planned obsolescence, stolen innovations, buried safety data. It's everywhere." "But it's changing," Devon interjected enthusiastically. "Companies are scared now. They're hiring ethics officers, opening their patent processes, actually listening to their engineers. One CEO told me last week that they've implemented a Frank Hughes protocol. Any janitor, secretary, or intern can raise concerns directly to the board without fear of retaliation." Frank chuckled. "I never thought I'd become a protocol." Later, that afternoon, Frank delivered his own presentation, not to the main conference, but to a smaller workshop for community college students and returning professionals. His audience included former prisoners, single parents, and others taking second chances at education. 15 years ago, I lost everything," Frank began, his voice steady and warm. "Career, reputation, savings. Gone. I won't lie to you. Those were dark years. Pushing a mop while watching others profit from your ideas. It tests your soul." He paused, making eye contact with individuals in the audience. "But here's what I learned in that darkness. Genius isn't about having the right degrees or connections. It's about seeing solutions where others see problems. It's about refusing to accept that's just how things are as an answer." A hand shot up. A middle-aged woman with graying hair spoke. "Mr. Hughes, I'm 47 years old, working 2 jobs, while taking night classes. Sometimes I wonder if I'm too late to make a difference." Frank smiled. "I was 47 when they destroyed my career. I was 62 when I finally got justice. Innovation doesn't have an expiration date. Neither do dreams." The workshop continued for 2 hours, with Frank sharing practical advice about protecting intellectual property, building support networks, and maintaining integrity in hostile environments. By the end, several participants were in tears, inspired by the possibility of second chances. That evening, a gala dinner celebrated the first anniversary of the Hughes Innovation Network. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, but Frank had insisted the event remain accessible. Tickets were priced affordably, with many given free to students and community members. Chase Reynolds' name came up only once during the dinner, when the Attorney General gave remarks about the ongoing legal reforms inspired by the case. "Mr. Reynolds is currently teaching fellow inmates basic literacy skills as part of his sentence," she noted. "It seems even he is capable of contributing something positive when properly motivated." The highlight of the evening was the presentation of the first annual Marlene Hughes Innovation Award. Frank took the stage to explain its significance. "My wife Marlene was a chemical engineer," he told the hushed audience. "Brilliant, creative, endlessly curious. When the Reynolds family destroyed our lives, she never lost faith. Even as illness took her strength, she kept designing, kept dreaming, kept believing that truth would prevail." He held up the award, an elegant sculpture combining a gear, a light bulb, and a raised fist. "This award goes to innovators who embody her spirit, who create not just for profit, but for progress, who stand up for what's right, even when it costs everything." The first recipient was Dr. Amira Patel, a young engineer who'd exposed safety violations in medical device manufacturing, facing deportation threats before the Hughes Network provided legal support. Her acceptance speech brought the room to its feet. "6 months ago, I was terrified," she said, clutching the award. "Today, I'm fearless, because I know I'm not alone. We're not alone. The janitors, the whistleblowers, the truth tellers. We're an army now. As the gala wound down, Frank stepped outside for fresh air. Carmen found him on the terrace, looking out at the city skyline. "Quite a year," she observed. "Just the beginning," Frank replied. "I heard from legal today. 3 more countries want to establish innovation centers: Japan, Germany, and South Korea. We'll need more funding. Already handled. Lindell's book advance is going straight into the expansion fund. Plus, we've got pledges from ethical investment firms totaling over $2 billion. Carmen whistled softly. "Not bad for a janitor and a blacklisted engineer." "We're not those people anymore," Frank said thoughtfully. "Maybe we never were. Maybe we were always exactly who we needed to be." The next morning brought a surprise visitor to Frank's office at the Innovation Center. Maria Rodriguez, the former Reynolds test driver, arrived with a teenage girl who bore a striking resemblance to her. "Mr. Hughes, this is my daughter Elena," Maria said. "She has something to show you." Elena, clearly nervous, pulled out a tablet and showed Frank detailed schematics for a new type of electric motor. "I've been working on this for 2 years," she explained. "It's 30% more efficient than anything currently available." Frank studied the designs carefully, asking technical questions that Elena answered with growing confidence. After 20 minutes, he looked up at Maria. "You know we'll protect this, right? Document everything, file the patents properly, make sure she gets credit." Maria's eyes glistened. "That's why we're here. I don't want her to go through what you did." "She won't," Frank assured them. "None of them will. Not anymore." After they left, Frank made a call to the patent office. Within hours, Elena's preliminary documentation was filed and protected. The Hughes Network's legal team would handle the rest. As the sun set on the Innovation Center, Frank performed his evening rounds, a habit from his janitorial days he couldn't shake. He checked windows, tested doors, made sure equipment was properly shut down. In the main workshop, he found a group of young engineers still at work, debugging code for an open-source diagnostic tool that would help independent mechanics identify fraudulent parts. "Don't stay too late," he called out. "Just like you used to, right, Mr. H?" One of them shot back with a grin. Frank laughed. "Learn from my mistakes. Balance matters too." Walking back to his office, Frank passed the memorial wall, photos and stories of inventors whose ideas had been stolen, careers destroyed by corporate predators. At the center hung a portrait of Marlene, her smile radiant and knowing. Beside her picture, someone had recently added a plaque with her words, "Genius doesn't need a title, just time, truth, and torque." Frank touched the plaque gently, then continued to his office where tomorrow's challenges waited. There were still battles to fight, still systems to change, still dreams to protect. But tonight, for just a moment, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't experienced in 15 years: peace. Not the peace of surrender, but the peace of purpose fulfilled. The janitor had become the guardian. The victim had become the protector. The silenced had become the voice for others. In laboratories across the city, young engineers worked late, secure in the knowledge that their innovations were safe. In boardrooms, executives thought twice before stealing ideas, knowing the consequences had teeth. In schools, children learned that integrity and innovation went hand in hand. And in a small office overlooking it all, Frank Hughes prepared for tomorrow's work, knowing that the mess he'd spent 15 years cleaning had finally been swept away for good. The truth, as it turned out, had excellent torque indeed. As midnight approached, Frank's computer chimed with a message from a young inventor and soul. "Mr. Hughes, I need help. My employer is trying to claim my hydrogen fuel cell design. I found your contact through the network. Can you help me?" Frank smiled and began typing his response. "Yes, I can help. Here's what we're going to do." The future was calling, and Frank Hughes was ready to answer. What hidden talents are being overlooked in your own life, and whose genius might you be dismissing simply because of their title or position? If this story of justice and redemption moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful tales of underdogs who changed everything.